Chapter 3. Atchaway looked in the direction Trill pointed, and saw a dark head cresting the canyon wall beside the waterfall. From where they stood, Atchaway could not discern age or gender, until she pulled herself over the lip. She was slender, something more than 5 foot length in height, with a wild tangle of hair the colour of dried blood. She tried to stand, but collapsed on the lip of the canyon and did not rise. Atchaway set off at a fast trot for the spot where she lay. He dropped to his knees beside her, fear gripping him as he laid a hand on her face. She was burning up. Atchaway scooped her in his arms. She weighed little, and he carried her swiftly to the side of the pool, where he dipped his hands in the water and wiped her flushed face. Her features were delicate, with evenly spaced eyes, a small, slightly pointed nose, full red lips, and a curved chin line. She could have been beautiful but for the mud on her face and the mass of tangled hair that formed a rat's nest around her head and the fevered flush on her cheeks. She wore a buckskin dress laced together on one shoulder, leaving the other exposed. The garment was something less than knee-length, sewn together from underarm to thigh and unadorned in any way. Her feet were clad in strips of leather tied at the tops to hold them on. They had barely survived the climb up the side of the ravine, and the sides of her feet were bleeding. Atchaway turned to look up at Trill and saw that Elin had joined them. She knelt and laid a hand on the girl's cheek and listened to her laboured breathing. "Bed, she needs herbs." Her eyes reflected compassion, not concern, and her tone was calm. She waved her arm to indicate Atchaway carry the girl to the cottage, and he bent obediently to pick her up, hurrying up the path to the dwelling. Once inside, he bent to lay the girl on the platform beside the stove, but Trill forestalled him, directing him to the pile of furs in the back of the room. He laid the girl down gently, his expression worried. "Mullen," Elin stated, "this herb heals the sickness of the lungs and helps stop the flesh burning. The leaves we dry and store till needed. Heat in water and drink, or inhale the smoke to cleanse the lungs. The girl needs this. Come," she invited. Atchaway was reluctant to leave the girl, but he followed. Elin led him outside, down the path to the waterfall, and into the cave. The cave was about the same size as the interior of the cottage, and a long shelf was cut into the back wall. There was a wide assortment of jars, pots, baskets, and wooden bowls, and strange wooden objects sitting on the shelf, not to mention the large wooden rack covered in drying herbs leaning against one side wall. In the back of the cave was a dark opening. Lynn reached a flint down from the high ledge and picked up a long reed-like stick, the top of which was dipped in bear grease. She used the flint to light the long wafer. The flames dispelled the darkness beyond and the opening, but set dancing shadows on the walls, which glistened with moisture. Atchaway looked up towards the ceiling and couldn't find it. The inside of the mountain was an enormous cavern, the cave acting as an entry chamber to the vast expanse within. He could see the ceiling of the cave behind them when he turned to look over his shoulder, but Elin was moving deeper into the cavern, and he hastened to follow. About 20 paces in from the antechamber, a large rock fall formed a barrier too high to easily traverse. Here bundles of herbs and sweet-smelling grasses were piled high to one side. Many large clay vessels of the type his people made were crowded beside it. She lifted the lid off one and scooped a handful into a clay bowl she had picked up off the shelf in the antechamber. "Taki, brazier," she said, pointing to a large clay bowl with a very thick base into which pebbles had been set. "To smoke the herbs," she explained. Atchaway picked it up and followed her back to the cottage. Once inside, Elin used a piece of slate to scoop some coals out of the firebox, which she then placed in the brazier Atchaway was carrying. She indicated he carry it back to the cot on which the girl lay. She followed, carrying one of the stools from the table and a strip of hard, dried hide. She set the chair beside the bed, and Atchaway put the brazier on it. "You must sprinkle the herbs on the coals," she instructed, and as he complied, began to gently fan the smoke over the girl with the dried hide. Then fan the smoke as in your dreaming ceremony. The girl stirred and moaned, beginning to toss restlessly as Atchaway smudged the alcove. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned his head to find Elin offering him a wooden drinking vessel. "It is mullein flowers, honey, in water. Let her drink when she can," she smiled. Atchaway took the cup and set it on the floor under the stool. He continued to fan the smoke towards the girl, adding more herbs as the brazier as needed. It was not long before her breathing eased and she ceased her restless tossing. Glassy eyes fluttered open, and she licked her lips with a dry tongue. Atchaway leaned towards her, slid his arm under her shoulders, and raised her to a half-sitting position. He held the cup to her lips, and she drank thirstily till it was all gone. Then he lowered her back to the bearskins. She slid into unconsciousness, tossing and turning as she slept. Atchaway had been so focused on the girl that he had not noticed Elin had left the cottage, and he now rose to search for the dryads. He found them standing by the forest, silent and still as saplings, but they turned as he approached, their faces serene as usual. "She is sleeping," he offered, and they nodded. "I don't know if it's a good sleep or a death sleep." He was scared for the girl was dying, because sickness was common among his people, and they often slipped into sleep and died of fevers like this. He did not want her to die. "She will need many days' care," Elin reassured him, "but will recover." The rest of that day Atchaway worked harder than he had ever done, and at things he had never done. Under Trill's instruction he gathered and stored dry branches and sticks, which he first snapped into similar lengths in the fork of a tree, then stacked in a large pile against the outer wall of the stone hut. Beside this he stacked stones to heat in the fire for cooking with. He built a fire pit in which to heat the stones, then built a lean-to over it to keep off the rain and winter snow. Periodically he checked on the girl, but she showed no sign of waking. Atchaway began to craft himself a bow. They were going to need meat. "I will show you how to make the tea of the mullein, yarrow, and juniper berries. Prepare a fire in the fire pit," Lynn instructed. Atchaway hurried to comply. He was already feeling protective of the girl, and if there was anything he could do to make her better, he was more than willing to do it. While the fire was getting established, Elin sent Atchaway down to the pool to fill a pitcher with water. Returning, he set it on the stove platform and went back to tending the fire. When nothing but coals were left, Atchaway buried several round stones in the embers and waited. Elin appeared at his side, carrying a small clay vessel like a miniature pitcher. The bowl of the vessel was filled with oil, and the spout held a length of spun wool that descended into the oil. Elin held one end of the wick against a glowing coal, and it quickly burst into flame. "This is a lamp," she told him. "The oil is from the Canabaha. It does not smoke like the mullein spike." She showed Atchaway how to shield the flame to prevent it blowing out when the lamp was being carried. As the shadows deepened and the sun dipped below the horizon, a full moon began to rise, bathing the night in soft illumination. Trill handed Atchaway a bowl of water. He took it, and removing a stone from the coals with 2 flat sticks, tapped the ashes off and placed it in the bowl, where it hissed and sizzled and made the water splutter. It took 2 stones, being submerged in this manner, to heat the water to Elin's satisfaction. A handful of herbs was then mixed into the water and let sit for some time. She then showed Atchaway how to strain the tea through a cloth into another pitcher. "This will be enough for tonight," she told him. "Sweeten it with the honey and give her all she wants. Watch over her throughout the night," Elin instructed. Atchaway nodded and turned towards the cottage door. The dryads moved in unison into the forest. Atchaway entered the cottage, the pitcher in one hand and the oil lamp in the other. The rising moon made the lamp unnecessary in this portion of the cottage. He looked towards the bed. She was still sleeping. He set both the pitcher and the lamp on the stool and laid a hand on her forehead. She opened her eyes. Atchaway snatched his hand back, feeling as if he had been caught taking liberties. Glazed eyes looked at him blankly for a moment, and he offered her the cup. She did not react. He slipped his hand under her and raised her up, holding the cup to her lips. She drained it, then her eyes fluttered closed again, and he lowered her to the bed. He didn't know what else he could do to make her comfortable, so he put some pieces of wood into the firebox, and rolling himself in a bearskin on the platform beside the stove, went to sleep. For 2 days he tended her in this manner. He sat by her side, smudging the alcove, wiping her face with a cool cloth, and giving her the tea whenever she stirred sufficiently to drink it. When he was not by her side, he was working on his bow and arrows. On the 3rd morning, Atchaway woke at dawn, and went immediately to check on the girl. She stirred as he approached, and opened her eyes, frowning. "Bata maheta?" she demanded, sitting up and looking around the interior of the cottage, her eyes wide and fearful. She scooted closer to the stone wall. Atchaway tried to keep his tone calm and gentle. "You are safe," he soothed, knowing she would not understand the words, but hoping she understood the tone. He poured out a cup of the tea and offered it to her. She eyed both the cup and him for a moment, then reached for the cup and drank thirstily. Atchaway picked up the clay bowl and let her see it. He trailed off, "if you need to—" He blushed and got up, leaving the girl alone in the cottage. Atchaway spent the day constructing a small stone smokehouse against the outer wall of the cottage beyond the fire pit. It was wide enough to stand with arms outstretched, and in the centre Atchaway built a fireplace lined all around with stones, which were set into a mud-clay mixture. On the base of the wall a single stone was left out. Through all this, Atchaway periodically checked on the girl. He replenished her tea pitcher, emptied her pot, and set some fruit on the stool beside the bed. She slept on. Her cheeks were still flushed with fever, but she did not toss restlessly. As the afternoon wore on, Atchaway built a fire in the fire pit and set rocks in the coals to heat. While the rocks were heating, he made a handful of arrows. He had 4 arrowheads tucked in his waistband, and he set each one carefully into a shaft after fletching. He made his way to the high meadow and returned in short order with a rabbit, which he dressed and dissected before laying it on the heated rocks to grill. "The girl will want to wash," he thought. "The water is cold. I will heat water with the stones." He added more stones to the fire and then refilled the basin from the pool by the waterfall and carried it up to the cottage, setting it on the ground by the fire pit. It was sunset by the time the stones were sufficiently hot to heat the basin of water. He took it inside, dropped a cloth in the basin, and carried it to the stool by the bed, where he set it down. He then returned to pick up the oil lamp, quickly headed to the fire pit to light the wick on a coal. He carried it carefully back inside, shielding the flame, and set it on beside the bed. Atchaway looked at the young face, streaked with grime, and he trembled. He reached for the cloth, squeezing the water out of it, and gently began to wash away the mud. Green eyes opened and focused on his face. Colours splashed in the darkness. Distorted faces floated past her as she tried to run from the pursuing shadows. Arms grasped at her as she ran, hands reaching for her feet. Long, thin fingernails scratched at her cheeks and tangled in her hair. She struggled to escape. She had been climbing. Her feet hurt, her head ached, and she was on fire. Flashes of starlight, and she was falling, only to be lifted in strong arms, to feel cold, wet hands on her burning skin. Then she was floating on a soft cloud. But the distorted shadows returned, and she tried to flee. Soft, soothing tones drifted over her. Cool, sweet liquid passed her lips, and she drank thirstily, only to sink back into the darkness. At some point, consciousness returned. She was lying on a pile of furs in a warm place, and a tall, handsome boy was standing over her looking concerned, and offering her a cup. He helped her to sit, and held the cup while she drank. He then showed her a basin and mimed squatting over it as he blushed a deep crimson, set the basin down and left the room. She used the basin and drifted right back to sleep, but her dreams were no longer troubled. A warm, moist cloth wiped her forehead and cheeks, was removed briefly, then repeated the process. Her eyes fluttered open and her gaze focused on the boy leaning over the bed. He was probably 17 summers, a little older than she, but definitely not of her people. Her clan were green-eyed and red-headed. She had seldom seen a black-headed person in all of her 15 years. "Where am I?" she asked huskily, struggling to sit up. He put an arm under her to help, speaking words she did not understand. He offered her a plate of rabbit, which she accepted, consuming it hungrily. She had no idea how long it had been since she had eaten. He took the empty plate and replenished it, filling one for himself before bringing them back to the bed. He lifted the pitcher off the stool and sat down, handing her her plate. She took it and started to eat it, then paused and, looking at the food in his hand, waited for him to also eat. "Jambaya," she encouraged. The boy blinks. "Jambaya," he responded excitedly, adding, "Mchaya." "You speak Dryad," she gasped, but he looked blankly at her. She frowned her disappointment and frustration, and saw it echoed on his face. "Atchaway," he said at last, patting his chest. "Atchaway." "Atchaway," she repeated, then patted her own chest and offered, "Jai-Dee." The boy smiled. It was now fairly dark in the cottage. The clouds had blanketed the sky, and the only light came from the oil lamp under the stool. He picked up the bowl of warm water and the cloth, taking the cloth out of the water, and squeezed the excess water out. He handed it to her and mimed washing herself. He left the cottage and sat by the fire for some time. When he returned, she looked a lot cleaner, and he smiled. "Sonne," he told her, reaching for the dish and setting the lamp on the stool. She lay down, curled into the furs, and pulled one over herself. She was too weak to think. She would think tomorrow. Atchaway carried the dishes over to the stove and set them down. He added a few pieces of wood to the firebox and then lay down, rolling himself into the bearskin as the night was chilly. He lay for a long time, listening to the sound of Jai-Dee's steady breathing and delighting in the fact that she knew at least some of the Dryad's language.